This review contains somewhat minor spoilers. If you haven't played the game yet, I highly recommend beating it before watching this. With that out of the way, let the rant begin. So, I played Resident Evil HD Remastered and I have things to say. Before moving on to the meat and potatoes of this review, let me first introduce myself. I'm Nimpo, and this is my channel where I upload gameplay and reviews. This is my first game review, and as you may or may not know, I stayed away from PlayStation and Xbox titles for a while. And by while I mean I still don't even own a console. Nonetheless, I managed to play a few titles that have PC ports on Steam. I was and in a way still am a PC gamer, and in today's video you're going to hear my 2 cents about a game near and dear to many people's hearts, especially many millennials. Yes, I'm talking about Resident Evil, a little known game that led to the creation of Resident Evil movies, TV series, and at least 7 other games bearing the same name. And last but not least, it amassed fans, loyal followers, and defenders worldwide, which are more likely than not to jump on me in the comments if I said something objectively incorrect or otherwise a statement about their favorite PS1 game that's outside of their echo chamber. Didn't mean to sound harsh on those people, but I also wanted to prepare you average lads for a potential carnage in the comments section that might ensue after posting this video. As a kid many years ago, I remember watching the 2002 Resident Evil movie on the cable and I was amazed by how cool it was. Still, even back in the day, the CGI in that movie was giving me lower abdomen pains, but that aside, I thought this film was the literal embodiment of badassery. You have a stunningly beautiful chick running around the compound dressed in red, slaying zombie dogs and avoiding death traps. What else can a young boy wish for at a time where movies with no substance filled with action-packed sequences were the best he knew? Fast forward to today's day and age, I would have probably switched off that movie right after the first cringe moment, or would have fallen asleep halfway through it if I were to watch it. But even though the Resident Evil movies weren't the cream of the crop horror works, they did indeed play a huge role in popularizing the brand outside the gaming circles. I remember clear as the day playing Counter-Strike Source with friends who were so much into Zombie Escape that we would play hours upon hours after school until dawn. It was so addictive, and we had such a good time that we couldn't stop until our bodies would begin to shut down. Now, you're probably asking yourselves, dude, what does this have to do with Resident Evil? And I'm going to tell you real quick. You'll be surprised to discover that the early 2000s till late 2000s period combined with the early years of the last decade was a period in gaming history when every other title was a zombie game. Half-Life 2, Left 4 Dead, Killing Floor, Zombie Panic Source, Dead Rising, Contagion, Minecraft, Plants vs. Zombies, Zombie Army, Call of Duty Zombies, and the list goes on and on and on. Literally almost every game I downloaded back in the day was a zombie game or had zombie mods, whether they'd been implemented before the launch of the said game or would have gradually popped up on the internet as mods. People's obsession with zombies and the good old satisfying headshot that would guarantee a kill was evident from beyond the horizon. In 2005, January 11th, Resident Evil 4 dropped fresh out of Capcom's bakery, and by the end of the same year it sold 3 million copies worldwide. This definitely played a huge role in the horror craze that had engulfed the gaming community back when Shakira was relevant, so other game studios tried to chase a high and rolled out all the titles we have at present. Resident Evil was officially the first game to adopt the term survival horror back in 1996, all according to Wikipedia, and even though it wasn't technically the first one incorporating survival elements within a horror, it without a doubt became the godfather of that particular subgenre and brought the brain-dead rotted corpses back to life after a long period of them being forgotten by the mainstream. Now let's talk about the actual game, what it did for me, how I felt while I was playing it, and my general thoughts about the execution of the remake. I'd like to preface this by saying that, unlike many YouTubers, I won't be talking about the story of it, or if I do, it'd be something off the cuff without me attempting to relay the plot with my own words. I played a total of 15 hours give or take, and my first and only playthrough was with Jill Valentine. As a man of culture and admirer of shapes, I normally play females in video games, so as soon as I saw I could play a fine chick, I didn't even think twice. What I thought about more than twice though, was a way to make my game playable and visible of all things. Let's rewind the tape a little and start with the elephant, no, the whale in the room. At first I thought, well, it's a famous game, everybody loves it, and even the people who don't really have an opinion about it say it's great because they don't want to feel the wrath of the 33 years old Twitch moderator intellectual who played this game secretly on his brother's PlayStation while his parents weren't home. So upon loading the game, my screen went absolutely black. I started pressing every possible button on my gamepad, nothing worked. Well then, I'm gonna go and swing by the trusty Reddit and see if the Zoomers have any solutions. Went back after 10 minutes with some info. I started messing with the game's frame rate, didn't work. In the end, I gave up since I couldn't change the one in the file. It would always go back to 60 FPS no matter how many times I tried to change to 120, so the only thing I could come up with was adjusting my monitor resolution to the one that was hard-baked in the file. And then the magic happened. I was able to see some parts of the game. I believe those were the in-game engine cutscenes plus my actual gameplay, but the pre-rendered movie type of cutscenes were just black for me. And it was really weird since I was able to observe them on my second monitor while streaming and recording, but they wouldn't show up on the screen I was playing on. Not to mention that one of those times while I was trying to set the resolution to be anything higher than 640p, I ended up blackstraining so hard even Ctrl-Alt-Delete would not toggle to Task Manager. I reached a point when I was ready to hit uninstall without further hesitation like I did with Bayonetta. I wouldn't have regretted my decision one bit because hear me out. An already huge and well-established corporation like Capcom has no excuse to butcher the PC port of the game that made them who they are today. It's disrespectful to the fans and newcomers alike, and it portrays them in a very bad light, as many people might go as far as to lump them together with the likes of Ubisoft, Bethesda, and CDPR, who, by the way, if you don't already know, are famous for releasing buggy piles of trash, many of which I unfortunately played, but let's not stray away too far from the topic. Moving on. The good news was that I really wanted to play Resident Evil, so I decided to power through this garbage port and judge the game by its other merits like gameplay loop, soundtrack, atmosphere, art style, and innovativeness. Needless to say, deciding if a game is innovative or not 26 years after its release would be a bit of a stretch, so the only thing I have here to help me with that is trusty Google. So I jumped in, I chose a character, and after 15 seconds of black screen, which I eventually learned how to skip, I was immediately hit with nostalgia. The 1996 textures paired with the 2015 character models, uncanny facial expressions and gestures sent me straight to 2006 when games had just begun to transition from the low-poly Counter-Strike 1.6 types of assets and muddy textures to the more contemporary detailed titles such as Crysis, Bioshock, Code 4, etc. All of that made me really happy and in a way excited about that new journey, but I was also blissfully unaware of what was about to happen as soon as the first cutscene ended. The survival horror aspect of Resident Evil didn't wait too long and present itself to me in its full glory. I soon realized that I'd run out of ink. For those of you who have no idea what I'm on about, in order to save your progress in this game, you must have ink ribbons on you. Ink ribbons are items that are usually very scarce and they only spawn like 6-7 times during the game in locations near or inside safe rooms. So after seeing my 5th death, I was left with two choices. Press on and find another ink ribbon somewhere, or restart the game and use my brain and resources more efficiently. I settled for the second option and then I continued to explore and wander about the map. At first I thought, okay, that would be easy. I have some puzzles here and there, I've played puzzle games before and solved harder problems than finding things to fit in holes and push objects around inside rooms. Well, I was wrong. The puzzles by themselves weren't the hard part. The real hard and tedious aspect of the game was navigating my map. As someone who'd never played a game like that, trying to find exits, backtracking like crazy, and remembering unnamed rooms was one of the most, if not the most obtuse things I'd done in a video game. And I'm not trying to be a princess for the sake of going against the grain. Resident Evil's map layout kicked my ass and then went on to punching me in the face with full force. But it wasn't the get-good type of an assault, it felt more like, let's test your visual memory with a blindfold on type of mauling. Some of you might enjoy running around a multi-leveled maze like a headless chicken, but honestly, that aspect of the game is one of the few things I dislike about it. I'm very well aware that according to internet sources, survival horrors are known to have maps like that, but at the same time, there could have been at least something, like very little something, that could have helped me with navigating better, like named rooms for instance, or using one color for staircases that go up, and another color for the ones that lead down. I do hate when, for example, more games hold your hand throughout the entire campaign, but Resident Evil really had my work cut out for me in a way I didn't like one bit. I also really want to express my dissatisfaction with the shooting system in the Resident Evil Remake by saying that, as a person who values precision aiming in games, whether they're third-person or first-person titles, Resident Evil made it impossible for me to enjoy aiming and shooting at enemies by stripping away my ability to point my guns at particular parts of the zombies' bodies. The game only let me choose between aiming up or down, that's it. You can't really do anything else other than those two actions with your thumbstick. Getting a headshot in the game is merely a random occurrence that has nothing to do with your skill nor your reflexes. Yes, I know that Resident Evil isn't a shooter game to begin with, but for crying out loud, couldn't have Capcom at the very least made it so that the players can choose between auto-aim on and off in the remake? If you have guns in a game, the least you can do as a developer is give me a choice whether I want to torture myself with assisted aiming on or off. Besides, that would have made the game even more tense and exciting, in my opinion, of course. Popping the heads of the undead with a revolver feels nice though, can't deny that. I'm writing this retroactively regarding my comment about the inability to turn auto-aim off in Resident Evil. I learned that beating the game on true survival grants you the permission to turn the aimbot off, but still in my opinion that shouldn't be something that has to be locked in the first place, period. Speaking of shooting and killing things across the map, you'll be surprised to learn that there are certain types of creatures you aren't supposed to kill at all. Well, I learned that the hard way. There was a certain section of the game where I ended up in an old shed with a supply box and a typewriter in it. Lo and behold, there was a freak inside of it with tentacles coming out of its deformed head, and I thought to myself, well, it's just another enemy. Maybe it would take me a few hits with the shotty or the revolver to blow its head off. After depleting almost all of my ammo, I soon realized that the game had shown me the biggest middle finger I'd gotten in a long while. The zombie was a special infected that wasn't supposed to be defeated but rather avoided. Thanks game for telling me that 2 hours after my first encounter with it. Playing survival games has been a hobby of mine since 2016 when I got into Don't Starve Together. I decided to break the cycle of shooter games and explore new territories, so I ventured in the survival genre subgenre and discovered a bunch of addictive, grindy and tilting titles such as the one I just mentioned, as well as Minecraft, Starbound, Terraria, Subnautica, Oxygen not included, and so on and so forth, which leads straight to my other issue with Resident Evil. The game's inventory is absolutely horrible. It's way too tiny, and in many cases you had to choose between leaving essential to the story progression objects in the chest, go exploring, find out that the things you'd left back in the safe room could possibly unlock doors, passageways, or otherwise progress the story after being stuck going up, down and around a maze you'd wish combusted into flames much like your head did due to the accumulated frustration. That said, the feeling of relief upon opening a door you've been trying to unlock for hours without looking up YouTube playthroughs or reading manuals is hard to describe. It's kind of like being locked up in a cell with only a small file for fingernails and you manage to cut through a single bar, or starting a fire in the Pacific Northwest rainforest. If you think I'm done with the bad aspects of the game, well, I'll have to disappoint you again. Tell me how on earth am I supposed to know that medicine boxes are supposed to be opened by pressing the interact button after rotating them so that the sign's facing you? That was the case with a few other objects scattered around the map, which only gave me clues by telling me obscure riddles. I remember there was one particular box which had a slot for something, could have been a day-old turd for all I know, but even after inspecting it I wasn't able to decide whether I should put an ink ribbon inside the den or just straight toss it in my chest and forget about 100%ing the maps. I'm not ashamed to admit that I looked up a couple of things on the tube because figuring everything out on my own would have rendered my brain absolutely frazzled. Among the things I googled was the solution I was supposed to spill at the base of the zombie plant that had spread its roots and branches throughout the entire mansion. Needless to say, that particular puzzle was stupid tough, and had I not googled it out, I'll still be mixing the concoction as we speak, failing miserably try after try. All in all, that was pretty much everything I had a gripe with when it comes to this game, so I think it's high time I moved on to the good aspects of Resident Evil Remake in order to end on a good note and soften the blows from the purists. I absolutely love the old school vibe this game had, which I attribute mainly to the dated facial animations, sharp character movement and the smudged pixelated textures here and there. I don't know why, but I really enjoy when games show their age after a while, and I get that warm and fuzzy feeling thinking to myself, man, I was only a boy when AAA titles still look like video games. The quote-unquote simplistic approach to the voice acting was also pretty sweet. It had cheesy one-liners, goofy dialogue, and it felt pretty staged and stiff. How can I not love it, seriously? It just brings me joy, and I don't really know why, nor can I put it into words. The chemistry between Jill and Barry was evident. They really bounce off each other and make for a great tag team, which was pretty sweet. To me, Jill almost looked like Barry's little sister, who would always get into trouble and had her ass saved by him on multiple occasions. Huge part of this game just screamed 80s action movie, which leads to the other strong aspect of Resident Evil, and that's the movie type of cutscenes for the lack of a better word. Now, if you put the technical issues I had with the PC port aside, the cutscenes were nothing short of terrific. There wasn't a whole lot of them, and they set the mood and served as connective tissue for the storyline, rather than turning the game into a film like Death Stranding. Thanks, Kojima. In fact, I was very pleasantly surprised when I saw that the first and last minutes of Resident Evil were almost identical to the beginning and the end of one of my favorite movies of all time, The Predator. I guess the writers and game directors have a good taste when it comes to Western productions, and I give them the thumbs up for that. I enjoyed the enemies in the game too. There were quite a few varieties, some of which weren't even infected humanoids, but rather ordinary animals, and even some mutated ones. Each and every type of enemy had their own attack pattern and dealt different amount of damage. Some of the creatures had poison effect, which didn't manage to tilt me that much because you could easily use ordinary medicine to postpone your death until you found a proper herb or made yourself a mix of herbs to neutralize the poison. The game handled absolutely perfectly the use of different phobias like fear of spiders, snakes, sharks, bugs, water, tight spaces, and more which I can't remember off the top of my head. One thing that I don't see many people touch upon is the fact that Resident Evil HD Remastered, and I suppose the original game too, do not have any HUD. It came as a bit of a surprise for me, a pleasant one at that, because I've always praised simple and immersive gameplay, and while the lack of a health bar, an ammo counter, or anything that would otherwise be in front of you in many other games, in Resident Evil you don't have it. Therefore you could immerse yourself easily and also take great screenshots, which I did a lot of during the game, without having to use any photo modes and such, which Resident Evil doesn't have anyway. Other games that have adopted the no-HUD approach are Penumbra, Amnesia, Scorn, which I've been playing a lot of recently, and all of them are incredibly immersive and fun to play. Mirror's Edge, albeit not under the horror genre umbrella, is another example of a mostly HUD-less game. The only thing you have there is like a small dot in the middle of the screen and a larger circle around it when shooting at enemies. And that's what I've been reiterating for years. Less interface in a lot of cases means a more real and personal experience. Among my favorite aspects of Resident Evil are the fixed cameras, believe it or not. They did indeed make me swear more than once, because when the camera angle changes abruptly while walking towards your goal, sometimes you push your thumbstick in the opposite direction to continue on your path, but instead of moving forward, you make a 180 towards the door where you came from initially. For me, that was immensely confusing and took me more than 10 tries to internalize and do it correctly without having to think about it constantly. With that said, I enjoyed that weird mechanic and all the jacked up angles from which I could observe my character. Resident Evil is still in a way a third-person game, but the utilization of fixed camera angles made the exploration part a bit more bearable since it intensified the fear of the unknown. What's ahead of me? Is there something lurking around the corner? Those questions were running through my mind constantly because of my limited vision and the fear of going back to the same room I was 3 hours ago with empty pockets. I remember there was a segment of the game where when you go through a door you could see your character facing you, which meant you could observe yourself but not what's right in front of you. Well, there were 3 fast zombies in that corridor I ended up after opening the door, and the closest one of them was just 3 feet away from my face. I learned that after quite literally bumping into it, and thank fuck I had a dagger on me to stun it, after which I darted back through the entrance I came from before I got shredded as a piece of paper by the other infected behind him. Good thing that the sound design of this game was on point. In fact, I quite fancy games where you can't solely rely on your eyesight and you also have to put your other senses into use in order to stay afloat. Can't stress enough how important sound design and clarity in games such as Resident Evil is. A well-timed jump scare and a sharp noise could startle you quite a lot and make you question yourself about your decision of playing a horror game ever again in your life. Of course, I believe too many jump scares are definitely a cheap way to make a title pass as a horror, but in Resident Evil Remake there were only a handful and they were very tastefully done and used throughout the length of the game. The usage of different sounds such as creaks from opening doors, old wooden flooring, climbs from unlocking things, zombie grunts and gurgles in a lot of cases weren't accompanied by any ambience, which in my opinion was another win for the sound engineers who understood the importance of silence being broken by a sudden clamor or a delicate chime. Little things like that can truly transform a game from a button pressing sim to a piece of art. Speaking of ambience and sound cues, the soundtrack was pretty solid overall. It served its purpose and masterfully accentuated the tense moments with frantically sounding horror themes, crescendos, synths that conveyed feelings of despair, confusion, insanity, and even relief. There are, I believe, 39 tracks in the Resident Evil OST and only 4 of them are calming and optimistic. My favorite one was the theme in the safe room where I felt the most at peace, and I used that room not only to replenish my health or get the ammo I needed, but also to unwind, gather my thoughts, and think of my next move. So every time I entered the room and I heard Sign of Relief, which is also the name of the music piece I was referring to, I would immediately relax and forget about the terror of being killed before saving my game. Believe it or not, I absolutely love the puzzles that didn't involve going up and down different floors or different buildings even. Capcom did a good job with creating puzzles that challenge your mind just enough to make you feel good about yourself and put you in a great headspace. That said, I wish there were less walking and more puzzles, or maybe problems that were more difficult to solve, but instead of them being dispersed throughout the whole map, I would have loved them to be solely confined to a single room or an area. And now let's talk about the greatest aspect of Resident Evil in my opinion, the writing. After a quick search in the game's wiki, apparently Kenichi Iwao and Yasuyuki Sanga were the guys who wrote the script. Script is in the story of the game, and they did a fantastic job. As you may already know, games have different ways through which they present the story to the player, but more often than not, they will do that through text or voice messages. Resident Evil took the notes, diaries approach, and soon after I started reading, I felt like I was looking at a book. Some of the stories left by the employees in the laboratory were terrifying, others were incredibly sad, like for example a man writing about his attempt to escape the premises of the building, but unfortunately ended up starving to death. Even so, his last thoughts were about his family and their safety. Another text file described the process of a guy slowly turning into a zombie through his own diary, where he would write about his days spent in the lab. Towards the end of the diary, it started becoming apparent that his cognitive functions were rapidly deteriorating and he's losing his humanity. What a truly horrible way to go out. But nothing really devastated me as much as reading the suicide note. I don't want to spoil too much of the game, although I already did that to a certain extent, but wow. I wasn't ready for this at all. Everything is set. All I need is a little courage to get it done. When I read that, I felt like something was stuck down my throat. If you can do this to me with only a few paragraphs, your job as a writer is done. Leave the rest to the programmers. The famous producer and game director Glenn Schofield once said in an interview that his goal was to make Resident Evil in space. He was talking of course about Dead Space, easily one of the greatest sci-fi horror titles in existence. Resident Evil became synonymous with the survival horror genre the way Half-Life and Doom are synonymous with classic shooters. This iconic piece of software paved the way for a huge number of horror titles and continues to inspire and captivate people around the world with its uniqueness and extensive lore built over the years. Resident Evil came out at a time when games were made with love and passion for the process and less so for the money. Games back then could not be patched after they rolled out on the shelves, so they had to be ready to play on day one after their release. Unfortunately, that was not the case with the game I played. What's even more frightening is that it's been 7 years since the game's appearance on Steam and nobody has addressed the issues people playing on their computers have had and are still having to this day. I blame Capcom for neglecting one of their greatest, if not their greatest title, and betraying their fans and supporters. Still, it'd be pretty hard for me to understate the sheer importance of the Resident Evil name and its legacy. Had I played this title 20 years ago, I would have probably loved it, for there was nothing like it at the time when it came out. Final thoughts and verdict. Resident Evil is a product of its time. It has definitely aged, and even the remade version would seem pretty ancient, especially for younger people or gamers that prefer graphics over substance. If you want to experience something different, something completely out of your wheelhouse, give this game a try. I enjoyed it more than I hated it, it was a nice change of pace, and as a mainly FPS player who's not exactly a bookworm, I was very impressed with the writing in it, something I initially thought I'd gloss over because I hate reading. Should you buy the game? Well, fix your damn port, Capcom.